Hello and welcome to ConTinual, the convention that's always here when you need us. My name is Jean Marie Ward, and tonight the subject is magic and telepathy in urban fantasy. So to lead us off, I'm going to ask everybody to introduce themselves, starting with John French.
Hi, I'm John L. French, retired crime scene investigator from Baltimore City Police Department. Now I'm a writer and editor of crime stories, pulp, noir, urban fantasy, horror, and cryptids.
JD.
Hi, I'm JD Blackrose, and I'm from Baltimore, but I write the Summoner's Mark series for Bellbridge Books and Monster Hunter Mom and the Zombie Cosmetologist novellas for Falstaff Books.
Patrick.
I'm Patrick Thomas. I write the Murphy's Lore humor urban fantasy series, which has several spin-offs: the Mystic Investigators Paranormal Mystery, most of which is urban fantasy, the Dear Cthulhu Advice columns and radio spots on Destiny's the Voice of Science Fiction, and as PT Fibs, I write books for kids, middle readers, picture books, and early readers with a YA coming.
Cool. Michael.
I'm Michael G. Williams. I write horror, urban fantasy, and science fiction, almost all of which is around sort of queer themes, and often I like to blend my genres.
You are interstitial, as the saying
Yes, I
am. And David.
I'm David R. Slayton. I write the Adam Binder series for Blackstone Publishing, which is about a broke gay witch from Guthrie, Oklahoma. So, Michael, it sounds like you and I might have some things in common, and I'm going to need to read your books. The first one is White Trash Warlock, which came out in 2020. I also have an upcoming spinoff series called Rogue Community College, set in the same universe. I also write fantasy and thrillers. I like to play around in a lot of genres.
Okay. Well, I am the ringer here. I normally, as most of you know, do not interject myself a lot in the panels that I moderate. However, I have to take a little bit of issue here that the subject is called urban fantasy, because way back when dinosaurs walked the earth and the aggressive power on the other side of the Danube was called the Soviet Union, they decided that in order to take over the world, they would use every means at their disposal, including psychic power. They set up an entire program as part of their intelligence community designed to harness the power of telepathy and what we would call magic, but they called things like telekinesis, etc. Now, I have read those documents, and frankly, there wasn't anything in them that a good table tipper couldn't manage. But of course, the United States, being the opponent of said Soviet Union, they decided that whatever the Soviets did, we had to do too, which led to a bunch of journalists in the 1980s discovering that in places like Aberdeen Proving Ground and the Stanford Research Institute, which had to change its name to SRI, people were doing things like trying to blow up goats by looking at them, and trying to view things at a distance, and trying to do all sorts of psychic things. Well, when reporters find out about really cool stuff like that, like Navy officers bringing briefcases of cash to psychics in New York, they get really upset. So what they did was they started calling the Pentagon, and nobody at the Pentagon wanted to talk about this. So they said, let Jean Marie do it. So for at least 2 years, I was the public affairs officer at the Pentagon who was responsible to look at all the documents that were not quite classified and say, oh, I don't see anything about telepathy in the budget, which of course it was, and it was black budget. Fast forward 20 years later, I submit a story to a magazine that is no longer in operation, and it got rejected because, boys and girls, Jean Marie Ward, the Department of Defense Public Affairs Officer for the Men Who Stare at Goats program, didn't know how telepathy worked. Did you all ever face that problem with your fiction? I'll start with you, David. You're muted.
I gotta admit, that one's a new one to me. It is interesting because I do use a lot of magic and paranormal aspects. So I write urban fantasy, but with a rural bent often. So really it's kind of rural fantasy. And I wanted to focus on a smaller setting as well as smaller cities. So it takes place in Guthrie, where I'm from, and then it also takes place here in Denver, where I live now. But nope, I have to admit, I've never quite encountered that. I have had a few moments of people emailing me or reaching out, readers saying, wait, that's not how the Fae work, or that's not how that works. No, you've got that all wrong. And I have to be like, okay, I was fictionalizing. I don't actually commune with elves. So
yeah, we do. That does seem to happen a lot. Like, oh, it doesn't work like that. Have you found that so as well, Patrick?
I have sometimes. In Murphy's Law, I kind of mix and match a lot of different mythologies and folklore, and a lot of people can take, especially with vampires for some reason, because people have very set ideas of how vampires should work, and if you vary from that at all, they get upset. Although I did have fun at a panel once where in my day job, I'm a physical therapist, and we've worked on cadavers and whatnot. I had someone start talking who obviously had never cut open a dead human before. And I said, that's actually not what happens when you do this. In my experience, when you cut them open, da 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 da. And I didn't explain to anyone why I knew that. And it got them just quiet. They sat back down, and it was a horror panel, so it worked out really nicely.
Why do you know that?
Right.
Well, I mean, why do you know what happens when you cut into a human? And why is it different from a pig?
It's not that much different because we did monkeys and cats. Like, we did not do pigs, so other than, Easter dinner. But they were about how the spine worked and the brain worked and how you cut them up and get them out, and they just were uninformed as to get it that precise, how much work you had to actually do, so it wasn't just a bloody mess. Once you get the abdominal cavity open, you can get some organs, but you're not getting the spine out like that. You're not getting nerves out. You're not getting the brain smoothly unless you have like a really nice bone saw.
That's what I was
go
thinking.
around and take it off and get it out.
I mean, most of the brain surgery that has been explained to me involves slicing the skin and muscles, pulling it back, and that's a bloody mess. But yeah, anyway, right there. John, you worked for the Baltimore Police Department, which, and you were in the forensics division, which entails a lot of science. Have you ever faced the, it's not worked like that, it doesn't happen that way, that goes counter to your experience of these things?
I've never really had anybody come up and tell me that I got my forensics wrong, because they hear that I was a CSI and automatically assume that I know everything there is to know about forensics, and they'll take my word for it, which really helps when you're facing a jury. But I did have, on the magical end of it, I was in a discussion with somebody who took objection to the fact that my angels are female. And he insisted that angels are genderless. And I replied, well, all my angels are female. And he basically said, that's sort of Freudian, isn't it? And I told him my angels aren't afraid of anybody. And he immediately stopped the conversation because he knew he was a crazy person.
Right, but that kind of joke keeps you young.
Bad. I can tell this is a putty group. Oh dear.
I have one actually involving John being that person. John and I have written several books together, and the show CSI, for like 7 years, had 2 of my books on Greg's desk. And in one episode, I have screenshots on my website. They threw one of my books at a suspect's head, and you could read the name and see the cover. I have screenshots of all this. And John, it's CSI, because of this, is my favorite show on television. It's back now. But John doesn't feel CSI is realistic enough, because you have 7 people doing the work of 50, and you don't get DNA evidence back in 12 hours and so on. He can give you a list. But because we've written the books and they liked me, they invited me to the set and all this stuff, they took our books to put on the set. So he had to sign the waiver saying he gave them permission to use them, and they didn't use them. But he was kind of torn, because he might be on a show that he didn't think was quite realistic to his day job.
No, I've only seen bits and pieces of CSI, and may CSI fans forgive me. While their forensics, from what I've observed, their forensics is okay, their procedures suck.
Mhm. Yeah, there is a lot of, in any kind of film media, a lot of compressing for storytelling, I think. And JD, you've covered the waterfront. You've had kosher shapeshifters, and you've had fae, and you have a zombie cosmetologist. Have you ever faced this problem of people looking at you and saying very seriously, "That's not how I know it works. That's not how any of this works"?
Oddly, never. I think it's because my characters, like, no one's ever going to assume that they exist in any type of reality. I mean, when I tell people my zombie cosmetologist was, he was turned into a zombie at the Battle of Shiloh during the Civil War, and now he's a cosmetologist to the biggest and greatest Hollywood stars, and he gets pulled into murder investigations, no one is ever going to think, oh, that could happen. So, I think it's just so far-fetched. I wrote a book. My first real book is called The Soul Wars, and I actually wrote it because, well, there were 2 reasons. First, I wanted to try to answer the question, why in literature do some vampires sparkle and others not? Like, we have good vampires and bad vampires, and I really wanted to sort of answer that question. So I said that at the moment when vampires are turned, they are given a choice to keep their soul or to give it up. And that's why it's called The Soul Wars. So that was the first thing. And the second thing was because I was reading Faith Hunter's Jane Yellowrock series, and in every single book, there's like a fire and a shootout at Leo's mansion. And I remember putting the book down and going, what do the neighbors think? And so I started off the book with this old New Orleans society lady, like, marching up to the vampire's house and rapping on it with her cane saying, "Keep it down, young man." And yeah, no one's like ever said a word. There's, okay, we'll take that magic system. And in the new books in the Summoner's Mark series, lots of weird stuff happen. And I mean, she summons demons, she's bartending at a fae bar. I mean, I got everything in there.
Yeah, it's the Fae Kissed series, right?
Demon Kissed, Fae Crossed.
Kissed.
That was good. You almost got it. Hellbound.
Well, it's we're in the ballpark. It's not a missus
pretty good.
a mile, but anyway, I got the kiss part. I got the Fae part. They just didn't go together.
I think that was excellent.
Anyway, Michael, you've done the Emperor Norton series. You've done the Autumn series, which is sci-fi, far future. You've done the Withrow Chronicles, which is vampires, and there was zombies in that first one. Did you ever get people saying, "That's not how it works. That's not how any of this works"?
Yes, about the weirdest things. My day job is in computer security, and I never include that stuff in a book, partly because, like, they have to pay me a lot to make me do that. And so they have to pay me, you know, I don't know, that came out sounding wrong. They have to pay me a salary to get me to show up for that. And I want to be able to just like enjoy writing.
Yeah.
And but the other reason is partly because, like, I don't know, you don't hand the enemy the accurate depiction of the tools of your trade. So I like never talk about that stuff, in part because if I did in a book, I would want to get it right. And if I wanted to obscure any parts of it, then it would drive me completely bananas to know that there was a book out there that got it wrong. So I just never talk about it.
Mhm.
But I have had people write to me and complain that I got vampires wrong. And my silent response, because that's the kind of email that you just delete, you know, you do yourself a favor by just ignoring it. But like what I thought in my head was, what's your point of reference for this? Like, says who? The International Vampire Board of Standards? You know, like, I don't know who out there makes the rules for that.
Mhm.
So, but in a lot of ways, I feel like comments like that reveal a person whose personal beliefs include sort of a larger organizational structure to the universe. And they just assume that there is somebody setting the rules in reality, and thus there needs to be somebody setting the rules in fiction as well. And like, if the rules in fiction don't match what they believe the rules are for reality, then it's wrong.
Mhm.
Another thing that I've had come up is in Autumn. The Autumn series is about a far future private eye, and he's just like really down on his luck and sort of washed up and trodden upon private eye in the finest of private eye traditions. But he also used to be a street hustler, and so he has a history of having done sex work, and he knows people who are sex workers, and he was a queer teenage runaway. And statistically speaking, there are a lot of teenage runaways who end up engaging in sex work for survival. And I have had somebody like go way out of their way to, in multiple forums, say that I talked too much about the fact that there was sex work in this person's life. And my take was like, nothing that I put in the book was something that I had made up. Everything about that was something that I knew someone that had done that or had that done to them, you know. So I don't know, it's the stuff. I feel like when people get really hung up on the details of something that is obviously fictional, what they're doing is telling you a lot about them and what their particular hangups and issues and past and skeletons in their closet are, and not so much about who's in charge of vampires.
Yeah, well, I guess a lot of people want to be in charge of vampires. I mean, they're rebooting True Blood, so obviously it's still striking a chord. In your urban fantasies, how does the magic work, and is it different between the two series, between the Withrow Chronicles and the Emperor Norton series?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So in the Withrow Chronicles, along the way, Withrow gets to know these witches who they call themselves techno-pagans. They are straight up magic using witches, but to them, it is important to think of magic as a technology that they do not yet sufficiently understand. And so they approach magic as, we're going to write a program, and we're going to have that program ready to execute if we need it. And there may be a code word or a key phrase or something like that. And they know, if they like ever really let themselves think about it in like the dark of the night, that there's something more to it than I've said the right words. They know that there's an act of will, there's an act of intention behind what's happening, and that some combination of the quantum effect of human consciousness on reality plus these code words is producing their desired effect. And in part, they know that because it's possible to get it wrong and mess it up. It's not as reliable as a chemistry experiment, but it's really important to them to think of it that way. And they aren't going to get into the conversation that suggests, which is that the system of magic a magic user uses in that world is shaped by the preconceived notions that magic user brings to magic. That like magic affects the person and affects the world, but the person practicing the magic affects magic. And so a different coven of witches in that same series called the Book People, they're bibliomancers. Their whole deal is they break into library sales in the middle of the night and they like read random passages out of books, and that's their form of divination. And they cast spells by like using memorized lines from books that they love, that they feel like have the right emotional quality to it for whatever it is they're trying to do. Totally different ways to approach magic, totally different sets of effects, and they would not be capable of doing each other's magic, because what they believe magic is what determines what magic is for them.
And in the Emperor Norton books, is it different?
It is, in that I try to be a lot more loosey-goosey with it in that one. There's like, they're demons and they are inherently magical, and so they just sort of have powers. And I don't try to get into explaining that because I'm not a demonologist. That's not my bag. And that's a thing where like somebody would be way too into it and I would have to defend something about it. And much like in talking about weapons in my books, because I don't know anything about weapons, I never say like the gun made by X company and it's this model number and it does these things and it has this many pew-pews. Instead, what I do is say the gun. And then I just like never have to fight somebody about that. I never have to hear that. And I'm kind of the same way with magic in the Emperor Norton series. The witches who have done the magic have like techniques that they use, and for that I kind of draw from sort of generically Wiccan practices. I myself am a neo-pagan, so that's all pretty familiar to me. And like they use tarot cards on occasion, and I practice reading the tarot, so I use their interpretation of the tarot as my interpretation of the tarot. And at some point, somebody's going to write to me and say that I got something wrong, and that's going to be okay because they read that card differently than I do, and that's just the nature of the beast. But the main character of that series, Emperor Norton, does not practice magic. And I explicitly want him to not understand exactly how magic happens, but to be able to benefit from it anyway, or to see it practiced around him and to sort of manifest it himself. Partly because the person of Emperor Norton in some ways went through life without totally understanding what his effect on the world was and his place in the world. And I just felt like it was more interesting to have magic remain mysterious than that.
And the telepathy only comes in with the vampires, I take it.
Yeah, vampires in the Wither Chronicles, when they go through something they refer to as the last gasp, which is when the last person who knew you when you were alive dies. And so there is no living person in the world who knew you as a human. Something mystical happens, and vampires don't know exactly why, and they don't want to get into why, because vampires in that series tend to be very materialistic, weirdly. They like to think of their bodies as being eternal, sort of carriages for their mind and experience. And let's not get into asking weird questions, because that leads people into experimenting, and experimenting leads somebody sticking their hand out the window in the middle of the daytime, and that leads to the house blowing up, and we don't want that. So just don't ask questions, don't think about that stuff. And when they do that, when that happens, when the last gasp happens, each vampire acquires sort of a new, unique power. And that power tends to allow them to draw something from the mind of their victim if they kill their victim, or draw something from their victim's life. And so like Withrow gains the ability over the course of the series to, if he kills someone, he can sort of say to the universe, I want to know everything this person knew about topic X, and then it's all just downloaded into his brain. And another vampire might be able to kill somebody and then look like that person for a day. Or they might kill somebody and for the next week recognize instantly anybody who knew that person, you know, or whatever. And so each of them has that as a unique ability, and because it's really personal to them, they're also, because vampires are very antisocial in that series, like they don't like to talk about the fact that it exists, they don't like to talk about why it happens, and they don't like to talk about what their powers are. So they tend to be very like hands-off about all those discussions, which leaves it, you know, something that can be sort of a source of shame and curiosity, and that's a really powerful part of the human experience.
Mm-hmm. Even after death.
Yeah.
It fears, yeah. Patrick, how does magic and telepathy, if it's applicable, work in your mini-series, and do they come together in any form? Do those worlds intersect?
To a certain degree, in the Murphy's Law universe, magic is an unnatural resource, which needs to be renewed in different ways. You know, the traditional ley lines, you can get it from other dimensions, and there are certain types of mages who create magic and bring it into the world. But in that universe, it's not like you can use magic, you can do anything with magic. it's a very specified field. So somebody could create illusions and somebody else might be able to manipulate flesh. Occasionally you'll get somebody who can do 2 or 3 of them, and that makes them more powerful. And then you have the ones who are called Magi's who can use it all. And they're the ones who bring the new magic in. Oddly enough, the telepathy that I use tends to be between animals or spirit animals and humans. As the spirit animals don't have any vocal cords or physical beings, they use telepathy, and in that universe, I use it mainly as a form of communication and speech. There's not a visual component, but more of a verbal. Even if it's heard inside your head, you don't get the visuals so much from it. So it's just kind of like projecting what you're saying, as opposed to, you know, being able to share a visual image or an emotion. Oh, well, that's actually not in that. I do have empaths who can, and propaths who can share emotions with other people, but it's not, I guess it would be considered a form of mental ability, but it's not considered telepathy. And I have another universe where I have a good witch fighting evil fairy tales, and her powers tend to work more traditional Wicca, casting spells, getting ingredients, making it work that way. So it varies with that. And with that one, the telepathy would be between the fairy tales are like otherworldly, Lovecraftian almost entities, and they would communicate telepathy as well, and they could do more emotional, and but it's not necessarily between humans, but between humans and others.
Okay. David, I know you say that it's a small town ambience, so maybe urban doesn't work, but in this context, I think urban fantasy has expanded to mean any place where people actually have cell phones. So yeah, I mean, hey, I mentioned Charlene Harris's True Blood series a while back. That took place in Bontemps, Louisiana, a little tiny town. So I think you qualify here. And the question is, though, how does magic work in your universe? And, you know, is there any telepathy involved? Is there any mind-to-mind communication, whether it be empathic or actual words, or the transmission of images, which is sort of kind of how it actually works in real life? But go for it.
It's funny you asked that, because there's a really big important spoiler around a telepathic moment that if I revealed it would totally spoil White Trash Warlock for anybody.
Don't do that.
I won't do that. But yeah, I think of it something, it's kind of something that Michael said, where magic is innate. I come at it from some of it depends on who you are or what you are. And I think of magic as a life force, or as an amount of it. So an immortal, like an elf, would have an infinite supply of magic, and their abilities and their capabilities with magic, because they have that large power source behind them that's very self-renewing, can do really incredible things. One of the things that I try to do, though, is flip tropes around a lot and play with new tropes, or you know, twist things. So Adam only has a little bit. He has just a little spark. He's very underpowered. I love urban fantasy, but I kept reading all these books where the character in book 1, you know, strides onto the scene and they're throwing fireballs and doing all these amazing feats of magic. And I think, how much more fun would it be if Adam is just this little scared underdog? You know, he's just terrified by everything around him to a degree. So he flies under the radar, and that makes him kind of good at magical reconnaissance, because since he is attuned to that lower level of magic, it gives him the ability to sense other things hiding down there. So he actually can do a lot, or it's kind of like it's a combination of what you've got in your blood based upon your race or where you come from, your species, I should say instead, as well as the talents you have to use it. So for example, think of it like a singer. They may not have a great range, but they could learn to be an expert with the voice that they have. And in Rogue Community College, the spinoff, since the main character is a completely different race who has a little bit of vampiric traits, though he's not a vampire, you get to kind of explore more corners of that universe and how different people with different talents or different species backgrounds can relate to magic. In my epic fantasy, Last Son of the Night, which I think is going to be out next year, my publisher hasn't given me the date yet, the magic all comes from the gods. So there's a sort of a give and take based upon how strong your faith is with your particular god. And most of the conflict in the book comes from worshipers of different gods having issues with one another.
Okay, cool. And John, how does the magic work in your books? I don't believe there's a lot of telepathy involved.
Well, there is, since Pat mentioned the species to species communication, in my cryptid novellas, there is telepathy in that the non-human characters communicate via thought. Dwayyo, Snallygaster, and the Chesapeake Bay Sea Monster all communicate between themselves and with humans via thought. But I have two series that deal with magic. One is the first and only book in the series so far is The Magic of Simon Toombs. And Simon's a gentleman adventurer with basically, he can convince the universe to do things that it doesn't want to do. But he does this with the knowledge that all magic, so to speak, must be paid for. And he has a talent of getting someone else to foot the bill. I mean, magic has to be paid for. You don't necessarily have to pay for it. Now, in my main series, the Bianca Jones series, Bianca is a Baltimore City police detective who fought a monster and learned to do a job once, and it's yours. She does not, other than being a badass, she has no specific magical powers. Her boyfriend and later husband is a retired criminalist, and he's the one who does magic, but being scientifically based, he tends to combine forensic principles with his magic. And later on, there's someone else he trains to do this. So you have such things as a quantum sorcery, or forensic magic and things like that. And so, yeah, so my books, I don't want to give anything away, but my books tend to use the basic rules of magic, like if you know someone's true name, you can have power over them. Or Joe Russo, who is Bianca's husband, is the caretaker of a bunch of books that seem to tell him certain things, how things work and how they don't work, and that leaves me open to how do I create conflict in that. Now, Pat and I wrote a couple of books which teamed my character Bianca Jones with his character Negril, a forgotten Sumerian god who is chief of police of hell. And we came up with the concept that a god, even though it might be a more or less forgotten god, gets their power from their believers. The more believers you have, and the stronger the belief is, the more powerful the god is. However, the god then shares its powers, or their powers, with their believers. So if you have only a few really strong believers, you have some really powerful believers.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But the more believers you get, the more diluted your power is among them, which would explain why at the beginning of a religion, a lot of miracles are possible. But as the religion goes citywide, then nationwide, then continent-wide, there are more people believing, and there are more people drawing from this power. Therefore, there are less miracles, and only a really strong believer can therefore do miracles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And in that story, we had a fanatical believer, like, uber believer, and he's a sun god from ancient times, and he was thinking he wanted to really upgrade his power. So he convinced this guy you think I can shoot laser beams, right? He's like, oh yeah, you could. All of a sudden he had a new power.
Ooh, that's dangerous.
So he was able to upgrade by using his
Yes.
believer's belief and redirecting it.
Believers
And-
are a scary thing, yes.
And this whole thing started with, not started with, but was helped out with by a poster of Humphrey Bogart.
All righty then. I can see a god looking like Humphrey Bogart, really pissed. Anyway, JD, how you've got several urban fantasy series, and does the magic work differently in all those series? And could you explain how it works? And I can see you're having an empathetic or telepathic connection with a very pretty orange cat there.
Yes, this is Teddy, and he obviously insisted on being a part of our
Conversation
Zoom today. Yes,
Yes.
he's. What you can't tell is I'm wearing black jeans, and I am now covered in orange cat hair, and it's like flying all around. So if you wonder what that is, it's
Yes, I wondered if there were gnats or something, but fur will do. Yes, fur
Terrible.
will do.
Story of my life. So yeah, so it's everything is a little bit different. In Monster Hunter Mom, I have this is in John Hartness's Bubba the Monster Hunter universe. And so my Monster Hunter is a suburban mom of 3 who drives a Toyota Sienna minivan and works for she's Jewish, but she works for the Holy Roman Catholic Church, because when I wrote them, that was the rules of the of the Bubba universe. And so she has a vampire can speak to her telepathically, and a phoenix, which is actually on the cover of the collection. His name is Blaze, can talk to her telepathically, but she's not particularly telepathic herself. She just has the ability with these two beings to communicate, and it's really more their talent than hers. She has, she brings other things to the table. In Demon Kissed and Fey Crossed and Hellbound, and those 3, they my main character, whose name is Bex, can do 2 things. She can enter the dreamscape, where she can, talk to people while she's sleeping, basically. And sometimes other people reach out to her that way. And then she can do something which makes her very special. She's the only one who can really do it. She can spin drift between, that's the term that it's used. She can basically go from, Earth to Fae to eventually to Hell. She can cross all these realms, and the process of doing that is called spin drifting. And she's really the only one who can. And so there's magic, innate to certain creatures and innate to her. There's a whole sort of otherworldly system where you do have, Fae and other things. And her main power, Bex's main power, is that she's a summoner, and she can summon entities of power or mortals, be they demons or other creatures. And I had a little bit of a choice to make, because this gets to the belief thing, which is my main character is Jewish, because I'm Jewish, and see, he doesn't like this party, so he's leaving. And I realized, one of the things about writing this book is that I wanted to play with demons. And demons, as you usually see them in mainstream urban fantasy, really come from a Christian tradition, the sort of Dante-esque kind of demons. And I was like, well, there is demonology in Judaism, but it's not going to really work for this. I want this to be very mainstream. I want people who read urban fantasy all the time to really feel like they can grasp it and that it feels comfortable. And so I was thinking, well, what am I going to do? Because my main character has to summon all of these different creatures that may not be part of her personal belief system. And so I decided that it depended on her client's belief system, and that freed up everything, because her job really is in the paranormal community to summon these entities of power, whatever they may be, to negotiate on behalf of a client when that client needs information or a favor. And you have to be really, really desperate by the time you get to Bex, right? You've used up every other opportunity, because these immortal creatures have had, millennia to get very good at negotiating, and they know all the loopholes. And so, when we start the first book, in fact, Demon Kiss, when we start the first book, we meet Bex after a demon summoning has gone horribly, horribly wrong. And she had to fix it and make it right. But as a result, she now owes a demon a favor. And she's hiding out in a Fey bar bartending because she doesn't know when this demon is going to call in his chip. And she's afraid of what he's going to ask her, what she's going to do if she has to say no. So, there's a pretty complicated magic system, but it's all based on belief and sort of innate powers that people are born with versus like studying and acquiring power over time. I would say, though, that if I wanted to point to when I first really thought about telepathy and stories, I always come back to the Dragon Riders of Pern, because I just remember the scene on the birthing sands where the dragon pops out of the egg and speaks to its rider in their head, and they announce his name is whatever. And since that's what I wanted desperately to have happen to me, like desperately, because I've always wanted a dragon of my own. I love that concept. I love that concept of there being telepathy, but it's not like worldwide. It's not like a broadcast system. It's a special bond between two
individuals.
Yeah.
Whatever their species or
Whatever.
kind may be. Yeah. Were you able to get that in your urban fantasies? Did you create that in your urban fantasy?
Well, I created the dreamscape and its counterpart, the nightmarescape, and of course her spindrifting crossing realms, which is not exactly the same, but she's really the only person who can do it, and so it makes her innately important.
Mm-hmm. Cool. I'm going to turn this a little bit on its head, and I'm going to go, if you had, if you lived in an urban fantasy universe, all of you, I'm going to ask everybody this, what one power would you like to call your own? JD?
I want to be able to pull anything I need out of my pocket.
Okay. David?
I know exactly.
David, how about you?
This is such a tough one. I would love teleportation. I would love to be able to just open a door and step onto a beach in Greece, right? Or to be able to just go to a museum anytime I want. I think that's probably the one I'd go with.
Okay. Michael?
Oh, it's psychomancy. I want to be able to touch something and see its past and see who handled it last and find out how it was used and why it was used and what its history is.
Mm-hmm. Cool. John?
Well, first of all, Michael, if you could do that, you would probably make an excellent crime scene investigator, because you could just pick up the gun and find out who fired it last. I think maybe this comes from my investigative background, but I think I would like mind reading, providing I could control it and not read everybody's mind all at once, because that would probably give me the world's biggest headache.
Yeah, and some of the things in our most inner thoughts are not for publication. Even, among good people, you look at something and go, yes.
Particularly a writer's mind.
Yes.
Because I will describe a plot or part of a story to my wife, and she will look at me and go, "What deep, dark part of your mind did you bring that out of?"
Oh my goodness, yes. Yeah, people don't want to know about that one. Anyway, Patrick, what about you?
Teleportation flight would be tempting, but I think I would go with, and this may come from my day job, the ability to heal. I think that would be a neat one, myself included in that, of course, you know. Not a healing factor, but to actually be able to heal wounds and disease and other things. I think that would be really worthwhile.
Yeah, that would be very good. Yes.
I'm going to cheat because I have a second.
Oh.
I want to be able to speak and read any language, living or dead, fluently.
That would be a very useful one too. I mean,
So
all of these
yeah.
are wonderful. That's been my dream, you know, my whole life. I've never been good with languages, but I always wanted it because I grew up in my mother was first generation Italian, and she and her brothers and sisters, whenever they didn't want the kids to know what was going on, they're all talking Italian. And damn it, I hated not knowing what was going on. That's just wrong, keeping me out of the loop.
Now, wait a minute. First generation Italian, like really? So what you're saying is you're immortal. You're the vampire.
And today you just need Google Translate. You just keep it running.
Actually,
and
that doesn't work.
Doesn't
I mean, I know
work.
enough German to know that it can't get it right.
Well,
And if it can't
uh,
get French right, and if you can't get French to English and English to French, you can't do squat.
see, I've done it with patients who spoke other languages. It takes a while, but it works with Russian, Ukrainian, Spanish, a couple others. I mean, but we're just going, you know, one sentence, so maybe the whole conversation might be too much.
Yeah, the whole conversation, I've tried to use it to translate passages, and it doesn't work. I once had a story where I needed somebody speaking German, and I lived in Germany for 3 years. And I took German all the way to college. I should be able to do it, but I knew my German wasn't that good. And I looked at what Google Translate was giving me, and then I called up a friend of mine who I know from high school, who's married a German and lives there, and said, Ilona, help, you know, because just Google couldn't manage it. But yeah, it's better than
Like I
nothing.
said, for the gist of it, it works. You know, you speak into it and it says something in bad grammar.
Yeah, it's better than nothing, and hopefully you won't be completely screwed up by it. But with medicine, to a certain extent, you do get not only do you get the verbal, you get the pointing, and yeah. But yeah, these are all great powers, seriously. Okay, we are on last coming up against the end of the hour, and one more lightning round. If you had to recommend one person as an urban fantasy writer, other than yourself and the people in this room, who would it be? Patrick?
Oh goodness. Probably a tie for like some of the ones I started off with. You know, those are always the best. I would say Jim Butcher's Dresden Files and Laurel K. Hamilton's Nita Blake Vampire Hunter up until Obsidian Butterfly. She
Okay.
changes gears, and I stopped. I keep right beyond that, but my enjoyment kind of went downhill as her sales went up. I mean, I can name a dozen, but those would be the two of the first ones I started with.
Okay,
I'll go with those.
David?
So I have three. If you like dark and gritty, Stephen Blackmore. I don't know why his Eric Carter series isn't like more well known.
It should be huge. It
Yeah,
should be huge. It's
they're
the best
so
noir
good.
out there.
Oh, I love his stuff. And then if you like my stuff, Katie Edwards, the tarot sequence, his third book, The Hourglass Throne, comes out next. See that my parakeets agreeing, comes out next month, and it's another one that's just such an amazing. It's like a urban fantasy action movie with high magic. It's just so good and witty, brilliant writing. And then when I want something that's a little more on the fun and playful side, everything by Gail Carriger. It's technically steampunk, but she's been slowly moving it forward in time. I just love everything she writes.
Cool. Michael?
Well, David stole one of mine. I was going to say Katie Edwards, and but that's okay because I've got backups. One, I think that she probably wouldn't like being described as urban fantasy because she prefers historical fantasy, but it's historical fantasy that contains a lot of the elements of urban fantasy. It tends to be set sometimes often in cities, and it's got angels and demons and stuff. And that is T. Frohawk's, how did I just forget the name of it in the middle of talking? Oh, crud. I'll look it up and say it in a minute. Wow. She has a historical fantasy series about angels and demons in the Spanish Civil War.
Okay,
That
could
is-
you give me the spelling of that?
Yes, Frohock.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. JD.
This is like asking me to choose between children, but Patricia Briggs, Faith Hunter and Richard Kadrey. Richard Kadrey is, of course, Sandman's Limb is super, super, super dark, but I also need to put in a plug for Stephen Blackmore's Eric Carter series. I agree. I don't know why that's not blowing up. And I did ask Stephen once why Eric has to go through so much physical stuff, like he's constantly injured and everything. And he said, because he does a lot of stupid shit. That was his response. And if you know, Stephen, that's like classic. And then I would also mention, because I love library portal stuff, Genevieve Cogman's Invisible Library series is fantastic.
Okay, that's all over the map by, history, urban. Yeah, I know.
I read everything.
Yeah, no, but I'm just saying that series is one that manages to be both historical and hit on every subgenre of fantasy.
And it's got shades of Sherlock Holmes,
Yes,
which is super fun.
with a dragon. Yes.
And I just remembered the name of T. Frohock series. It is called Los Nephilim, LOSNEFILIM. And the first book is called Where Oblivion Lives.
What a wonderful title. Great. John, who would you
Okay.
recommend?
I have a bunch, but let me just go with for more fantasy than urban, Charles DeLint. For really urban PI fantasy, Simon R. Green's Nightside series. Of late, I've been reading a lot of Shannon McGuire's books. You've got to love an author who dares to title a book Dying with Her Cheer Pants On.
Mm-hmm.
And since we haven't mentioned Telepathy, you're not going to get any better than Alfred Bester's The Demolished Man.
Yes, definitely. Okay, we are alas at the end of the hour. So I'm going to ask everybody to tell folks what your latest published work is and where they can find you on the web. Starting with you, John.
Okay, my latest published works are Mortal Sins, which has no fantasy, but it's very urban. It's about a former CSI, former private eye, who's now a forensic investigator for the Baltimore City State's Attorney's Office. And as they would say on A Law and Order, these stories are ripped from the headlines. Plus, Frankenstein, Monsters of the Abyss, written with Patrick Thomas. It is a retelling of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein story with all the good parts put back in, and ask the question, what is a monster and how many monsters are really there in this book? You can find me on Facebook. You can email me at jfrenchfam@aol.com, and you can follow me on BookBub.
Okay, great. Do you have a website?
No.
Okay, Patrick, latest books and where can folks find you on the web?
Frankenstein, like John mentioned, Cryptid Fight Club, which is a PI story where he accidentally stumbles across just what it sounds like an underground club in Las Vegas where they're pitting cryptids against each other for fun and profit. Bikini Jones versus the Brain Nappers from Outer Space, a woman who's cursed to wear a bikini saves the world on a regular basis, and in this case against brain napping aliens. Forgetting, as Patrick T. Phibbs, I write kids books, as I said. Joy Reaper checks out. It's what happens on Take Your Kid to Work Day when the Grim Reaper brings his daughter along. I feel like I'm forgetting a book. I think that must be it though.
And website?
Oh, www.patthomas.net, and for the kid stuff, patricktfibs.com.
Okay, great.
Oh, and Patrick and I are going to have stories in a Bold Venture Press anthology, The Zorro Exploits. New stories about the character who indirectly killed Batman's parents.
Okay, that's interesting. Bringing Batman and Zorro together. All righty then. David.
So let's see, White Trash Warlock and Trailer Park Trickster in the Adam Binder series are out now. The third book, Deadbeat Druid, is out in October. Those are all from Blackstone Publishing in ebook, audio, and paperback. Next year, I have Rogue Community College, a spinoff, Last Son of the Night, an epic fantasy, and a gay, geeky rom-com called To Catch a Geek, which will be coming out from Crazy Maple. And you can find me at davidslayton.com. That's my website. If you're looking for me on social media, all my handles are there. So davidslayton.com. Don't forget the R. There's a lot of Florida man David Slayton types. So you want the R in there. And also, if you're looking to interact with me, I'm most active on Twitter right now.
Okay. Michael.
I'm at the moment of this recording. My most recent book is the third book in my Emperor Norton time travel urban fantasy series called, that series is called Servant Sovereign. That book is called Shut the Gates of Mercy. Every book in that series is titled using a quote from a eulogy of Emperor Norton from the real world. And so Shut the Gates of Mercy is a time travel book set in the 60s. And my next book is coming out in June. It's the second book in the Autumn series, my far future science fiction detective series. And that's going to be called New Life in Autumn. It's a sequel to A Fallen Autumn. And then my current work in progress is an Appalachian ghost story / cosmic horror novel called Our Contemporary Ancestors for now. And you can find me on Twitter as @McManlyPants, and you can find my website as michaelgwilliamsbooks.com. Not to be confused with a different Michael G. Williams in Chicago, who apparently recently published a very successful children's book. And there are some people trying to find his children's book. Bless their hearts, they are finding me.
Oh, that could be interesting, especially if they get to Withrow. Yes. Anyway, JD, what's your most recent release? And where can folks find you on the web?
Well, as of today on this recording, Hellbound, the third in the Summoner's Mark trilogy, is up for pre-order. So go look for that. And the book that will be coming out after that is A Wrinkle and Crime. Which is my zombie cosmetologist collection. So it takes pluck and cover, hide and cheat, cut and dyed, and pros and cons, and puts them together into one collection, and that'll be coming out soon. Great. Oh, and you can find me at slipperywords.com.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you all for a great panel. And thank you out there.
Excuse me, Jean, where can we find you?
Oh, thank you, John. But you can find me at jeanmarieward.com. I'm very boring that way. And I'm on all social media in some form or another of that. So thanks, John. Again, thank you all for a really, really wonderful panel. And thank you out there for watching. And if you like what you see, come back again. We've always got more programming for you at ConTinual. Good night.